that. It reminded me of some stories when I was growing up. I have a pretty big family. So yeah, it was not uncommon to piss someone off by putting your finger in their food.
That
Or
whole my germs kind of a thing.
yep, yep. But yeah, uh, punching mashed potatoes explodes more than you would even expect.
Somehow that seems like that is very good inspiration to somehow include into an RP adventure.
Should be good.
We
Well,
actually, well, Silver. I'll tell you, there's one quick story about mashed potatoes. Not in the store physically. In one of my fourth edition campaigns, my players made kind of a paramilitary group, and one of my characters, I was the DM. So one of the characters had a wife who would serve dinner to the characters as they were having kind of a war council or a planning. And we always called it the mashed potato war council because potatoes were kind of quick and easy to make. And also, the characters would take the giant platter of mashed potatoes and they would form it into a battle map because you can mold the mashed potatoes into like mountains and rivers and stuff like that. And so not only would they eat mashed potatoes, but they'd have their mashed potato war council as they made battle plans. Over to you, Technatron. Sorry.
oh no, no, that's fine. Uh, that's actually like really cool. There's a game called Clayorama, and it's for kids, and it's very similar to that. It's like a D&D light game where you can make your own monster or whatever and give them missiles, and they have all these rules for it. And at the end, the winner gets to dry out their monster and keep it as a trophy. So very similar um,
Hmm.
to that, but also I believe in the infancy of D&D. Also, sandboxes were the preferred terrain. And those were really, really, it's very interesting how involved some of those people get with those boards.
Oh yes, yes indeed. Well,
Um,
you are here, sir, and welcome back.
oh,
We've been
thank
having
you so
a
much
heck
for
of a
having me.
time talking, not in a bad way. I've enjoyed
Oh,
every moment of it.
but yeah, we can get into monster building, and actually, it's one of my more favorite things. For as long as I can remember, I've been making monsters. So, it was when I learned about Magic the Gathering, and I saw that you could actually play a game with monsters and stuff like that. I was hooked. And so, pretty much my whole life from like being a kid and everything, I was either drawing or creating monsters on some sort of level.
I did
So,
notice you have doodled a monster or two. Do you mind if I put up that Pinterest page of yours about monsters that you
oh,
have drawn?
yeah, feel free. We can give a little like overview of what they are, and
Yeah, take us through. I have your illustrations up. Let me know which
yeah,
one you want me to click on.
we can go from the bottom one, the caster. Um, that one is Namo the wizard, and essentially this all stemmed from a person came into my stream one day and said, "Well, how do you create monsters and stuff like that?" And I was just drawing around, and I was like, "Well, you just have some simple tools, but give it an environment, throw two things together, you'll create something." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, watch this. I take a gnome, I take a shocker lizard, throw them in the Underdark. What do I get?" This is what I came up with. So I made it this amphibious, kind of gnomish race, and because it's in the Underdark, gave it really big eyes. And then I started thinking deeper about this creature, and I was like, well, uh, anglerfish, they have a lure. Well, what if there was a creature that was very similar? So I gave them this like lighting belly so they could see better, and also that it attracts their prey. But
Ah.
being the Underdark, it's like that would be a very bad thing because there's beholders, there's things that can just scoop you up and eat you because this is a smaller race being like in gnomish size. So I gave them the racial ability that they explode when they
Oh.
are eaten. So one of the first times I ran this playable race monster in a group, they threw me into the room and had me explode. So, a very useful thing, but the investment is very heavy. And the thing is just going down that rabbit hole. We have a playable race. Now I have like an iconic character that's like personal to me. Like I refer to him as Namo the Wizard,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's just really great. Um, Another one to the far right, it's that purplish monster. Looks more like a dog cat
Yeah, yeah.
kind of thing.
This is a Gorglub.
Yes, this is a Gorglub, and essentially, I was like, there's always missing pieces, and what this one came from is, well, the Rust monster is extremely iconic, and it's because it's one of the only monsters that attacks players from a side that they don't expect. Well, Gorglub is essentially the same as that, but for magic items. It only eats like magical scrolls, magical swords, anything like that. And they're very sought after by wizards and stuff because one thing that they can do is they can consume cursed items and they can take their blood, and it's very useful for because it's magical and they live off of magical things, would mean that they're highly have some very good magical components with inside of their blood or skin or whatever. So I made them about the size of a bread box or a house cat, but I wanted them to be a little bit more interesting. So I made them highly intelligent. So even though wizards want them in their
Der
room,
Kobold
there's a
5.
high
M2
possibility
Kobold
the wizard
2.
leaves
Flop
and they
1.
find a way
Marder
to
Magische
eat their
1.
entire
Dragon heißt Animate für
library
1.
or whatever it may be. And one of their distinguishing things, and I kind of show it in the picture, but it's small, but it drools green when it starts sensing magical items. So that was kind of the premise of that. Like I was just like, oh, let's make a interesting monster. Like I like the fact that it comes from a different angle,
Yeah.
and yeah, like that's a perfect example of a monster that came out of essentially nowhere and is completely unique to the world. And then there's another interesting one, and it's the pair of hands. I believe that one is the next one. So in the pair of hands, it was a bit interesting because I made something for Dark Sun. And Dark Sun is this grueling type setting, and death is pretty much imminent and like it is not good. So I was like, I need to make a monster for it. And what I did is I made this greater invisibility monster that has extremely good stealth and is also liquid. And what it is if you ingest it, it now makes it so you can no longer gain hit points due to healing or rest.
Oh, so it's like a parasite or something inside you?
Exactly. So it can attack you, but more than likely it wants you to ingest because it feeds off of you and also prevents you from getting your hit points.
Ooh.
So that one is a very interesting monster, and it was also very interesting to make a liquid invisible monster. So that was a fun way to build something.
Now, we're going to be getting into things like challenge rating and the mechanics. On the descriptor alone, I mean, you might surprise me, or if anyone in chat wants to guess, in fact, I'll challenge you all out there. Guess the challenge rating of this monster that Technatron just described. This kind of invisible, like a liquid monster that can attack you and prevent you from healing. So everyone, throw out your challenge ratings about what you think they will be, and then we can have the big reveal, and you can get into the details about how you arrived at that. When we're doing the fuller, like after this kind of priming. So I'm seeing a 4. I'm seeing a challenge rating 1/4, and there are challenge ratings. It's 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. I think is the minimum, and then 0.
Yeah,
CR0 is a thing too.
Oh yeah, for cats and
yeah,
things of that nature.
Silver's thinking that this is a 6. I would put this. I'll throw my hat in, and I will call this a CR. Based on what you've described, I'll call this a CR1.
Okay.
And James, you are correct. Ultimately, you can calculate that through hit points and whatnot. But based on what Technatron had given us in the presentation, in the description of the mechanics. All right, so we have a 4, a 1/4, a 6, and a 1. Can you give us the big reveal about what was the challenge rating of this monster as you actually put the pencil? Oh, Bubonic is slipping in a 3 real quick, and James a 1/2.
Okay.
What is the CR then, as you conceive this beyond just the sketch and the blurb?
This one is a bit interesting because it has greater invisibility, so that's the big key. So it has access to a higher level spell. But the thing is it doesn't necessarily make it really that high, and also the hit points are extremely great. So the thing is I would say the closest CR is probably 4. And the thing is that essentially lets people deal with it and stuff like that. And also when you find it doesn't have a heavy hit point pool. But I would also say the CR is very dependent on the setting, because something of this in Dark Sun is far more deadly than just an average campaign due to it not being a sickness. So you can't cure it. You can't do certain things when it's ingested. And also water being so important in that setting. So I would say a good way to understand CR is understanding environment is very important when calculating certain things. Just like with a monster like this, the hit points would very much vary. If someone drank this and went up against a boss, a level 7 character could be dropped down to about 10 hit points. Let's say they go to drink a potion, nothing happens. The kobold runs up and hits them with a spear. Crits, they're dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is interesting though. That for the fact that it was designed for Dark Sun, so it had that in mind.
And yeah, the context of the monster can play into the presentation, the mechanics, and such. Do you want to move on to another monster?
Sure. I believe the next one is this myself. Just this floating monster I created. This has no context. It was inspired by someone else's drawing that I saw, and then I wanted to recreate it, give it a gnarly face, give it spider eyes. And
to me, it's like a floating tick or something.
Yeah, very much so. The dreaded flying spider.
That would be quite dreadful for many people.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was just a creative session of I want to draw. It's not really even you're thinking about the mechanics. You just want to go for a feel, or you just wanted to try out.
I was just inspired, and like this is kind of, well, what if? Like if I put this together, and try to make it look like this. And also it having a different, it gives it kind of a lift with that bulbous head and the wings, but it's kind of fun because you don't think of these Zeppelin monsters. But in fact, once I did put this into a game and came up with it after the fact, it was a swarm type monster that eats people's memories. And the whole point of this is that bullywugs love them because they make them hallucinate and see into the future.
and you're building an ecosystem by doing this as well. Huh.
But yeah, that's what I did with this one. I was like, okay, let's make these really teeny, have them be in a swarm, and bullywugs would eat something about that size because frogs eat anything. And so I gave them a little, like, a society where people were these seers, but also they were tripping a lot by eating them, so they were kind of messed up bullywugs trying to make sense of it all.
And I do want to encourage folks to also just sit down and draw, or, you know, if you have some old toys, a lot of the original D&D monsters were the players just sat down and they took a hacksaw to some old toys, glued them back together in interesting patterns, and put those on their battle mats as the miniatures. And that's how you can come up with different monsters. Just create something. You don't even have to know what it will do, but through the creative process, you know, you start getting a feel of what you were talking about. Let's give it fangs, or, you know, I'm kind of liking where this is going. Maybe it is fueled by thoughts or something like that. And then suddenly the drawing speaks to you, inspires you, then you draw more inspired, that it goes on to inspire you, and you're creating this this self, you know, kind of a psyching up factor.
Well, yeah. Sometimes it's you creating the environment for your monster, and sometimes it's your monster that you create makes you think of an environment for it. So, like, you kind of look at it and you're like, well, what if, I was saying before with Nama the Wizard, what if I threw this monster in this place, what would I create? Well, sometimes creating the monster, you're like, how can I apply this to a world and make it make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And so sometimes, yeah, a monster can totally inspire you to do something more or create something that's pretty unique, or a modified stringe, as was put. But anyways, that's a monster that I've made. And then the last one, I believe, is well, I was thinking about it. It could be its own custom monster just as is, but it was me thinking I don't prefer the look of Skull Lords because they have the 3 heads and it just always looks top heavy and like they'll topple. And if you're a Skull Lord, I was like, what if I fused the skulls together, made it more intimidating looking? And I was like, this is what I would use for a skull. But this actually is very close to a monster that I made previously for some players that they wanted something that they could train with. And I had a session, and it was during Halloween, and I had them walk into a crypt. And in the crypt was a bleached, shambling mound that was possessed. But this shambling mound was speaking to them as they were walking through, and when they walked into one of the rooms, it was completely full of skeletons, bodies, and stuff like that. And then in the middle was a glowing green coffin. And the shambling mound instructed them to put stuff inside of the coffin and seal it. So I told them, grab whatever skeleton you want, do whatever you want. And what they actually did is they grabbed all the heads, put the heads in the middle of it. And after they defeated the boss, I told them, well, your magic or your reward is in the coffin. And they opened it up, and there was a monster that fused all the heads together, and it had multiple attacks, could go after them. So whatever bone monster they created was theirs to play with. And I gave him we called it Bob. But Bob could take infinite damage, and it had as many attacks as skulls that it could consume. So if they wanted a higher challenge rating, something that attacked more, they could just throw in another head and give it like 8 attacks. But very reminiscent of Bob.
I don't suppose you ever sketched your jiggler oozes, did you?
Oh, the ooze jigglers?
Yeah, the ooze jigglers. I remember you making those. Those were fun.
Yeah, another fun monster. We'll just talk about the ooze jigglers. I was thinking, like, I really like the voodoo shaman witch doctor kind of stuff, or the mad scientist. And I was like, well, a witch doctor, they're all about like the voodoo doll and stuff like that, or sacrifice. And oozes technically are a living creature, but what if they needed something a little bit more? So I designed a monster that was literally potions that they infused with small oozes, so they could sacrifice something while they're getting the potion effect. So it's like a twofer. But I was like, well, we need to give them something a little bit more unique. So I made them essentially like Flubber. Really fast, jumping all over the place. So not necessarily the best place to keep your potions, but the fact that they can put them in their belt, they jump around, and then they have a sacrifice and also something to give them 2d4 plus 2, or I believe that is what a standard healing potion is.
That sounds familiar. Yes. So it's a little healing, wiggling Jello shot.
Exactly. And they're very popular in the spring break of the Sword Coast.
Yes, I'm sure indeed they are.
But but anyways, those are and I've created, I don't know, a good amount of monsters over the years, but that is just a handful and some of my art.
And I appreciate you sharing this inspiration, and especially the art that you put into some of these.
Oh, thank you so much. But I'll get into kind of what we were getting with the first point is I say the contrast in matching settings. And what I mean with that, with your monsters, is you always want your monster to come into the party or the environment with an impact. So you want your players to say, that's not right, or this should not be here. But also on that same fact, it lives in that world. So it kind of has a familiarity. So it fits your setting, but you want the contrast of your monster to hit like this is not right, because that will create a sense of uh, urgency, kind of the similar effect like when a wild animal enters into a city and the people just don't know what to do. You can see plenty of videos like where like mountain lions or even deer uh, go into cities and people just, it lives in your world, but people are so detached, it really causes almost a panic.
Yeah, because you're so used to what's happening around you, and then you get that foreign thing, and of course the lack of information is often what causes fear. And well, a displaced monster or a monster that doesn't seem to fit in is a very good a very good source of that shock, that fight or flight, or that whoa. That's the cool factor. That's I never thought of something like that before, especially in a region like this, or a city like this, or whatever, a biome like this.
Yeah, and the thing is it creates that sense of urgency, and also it gives you an idea of how like townsfolk will work, or the reason why they would want adventurers to take care of it. Uh, a good example is like the chupacabra, the goat eater. Uh, uh, is a monster that people used. And also, if you notice, a lot of monsters that are created are generally taking something from society, whether it's their goats or an unborn child or all these other things. That's what gives it its like the intensity of a monster in a society. Um, and so that's very important when you're adding the monster to your game or creating more of an impact. Um, just running into a demon uh, in its natural habitat is far less dramatic than a demon entering into the player's inn.
Yeah, you take a planar trip to the abyss, you expect to see demons. You go to your favorite downtown, watering hole for a drink after work, and there's a demon, the same one that you would have saw otherwise, and yeah, that causes a fuss.
And rightly so. Kind of like what we were talking about the other day when we were goofing around opening up packs and stuff, uh, or boxes, and the thing that was interesting. We talked about the nine hells, but yet there was a celestial being. And we're
Yes.
like, well, now we have a mind flayer. How is this going to interact? And actually, having a celestial in the nine hells, you would expect them to be more of a like against everything that they're doing, but maybe they are in cahoots with something else, and you might have a fallen angel or
And harkening
other
back to
things
the
that.
advice of reskinning or rehashing and the like, it's not just then a celestial or a fiend. This is your interpretation or your character. It's your NPC as a
Oh yeah.
monster, because monsters are NPCs, villains are NPCs, and the local bartender's an NPC as long as a player isn't piloting it.
Oh, definitely. And that's actually really important with like the reskinning and everything as well. Um if you ever have a more experienced player, they're like, I don't know how many times you can just do simple things, like as simple as making that owlbear one size category larger and they're blue.
Do you
Instantly
do you
their
want to
mind.
did you want to go into talking about the kind of do's and don'ts of reskinning monsters?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that is one of the do's. You can keep the owlbear entirely the same, but I guess going up a size category will change some effects, but I don't believe with the owlbear. Um, but the thing is generally if you keep the hit points the same and keep it a standard owlbear, most people won't know what to do. Um, or they'll treat it with a little bit more respect and hesitance to jump into the situation right away. Another example is like a old man at the docks. Well, it's just an old man, but then all of a sudden they start casting magic and going a little bit more insane. Well, that's just essentially a reskinned sea hag, and your players won't necessarily know that that old man is a sea hag, but yet like through a little bit of reworking, you don't have to change the hit points, you don't have to change the spells, but it will create a much better interaction and something that's a little bit more unique for your players, and also making that game a little bit more for you. Um, because the thing is using the monster manual as a resource is huge, and just changing small little things like color or essentially race or just small little things and getting a new skin on it, it will have people guessing constantly.
And I do want to point out that the Dungeon Master's Guide does heavily advocate reskin our monsters. You don't have to feel shame. You don't have to feel, oh man, am I reduced to this? You have the full blessing of the Monster Manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide to reskin monsters as you think it's appropriate. And I'll tell y'all, a beholder makes a very good human wizard.
I can see that.
Silver Pirate, you're off to bed. All right. Well, good night, and thank you for hanging out with us tonight, Silver Pirate. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, take care, Silver. um but yeah, a big don't with reskinning is giving it something more than it has, but always going back to the original thing. So saying that it has a magical sword, this and that, but then when the players go to loot it or whatever it may be, you would be like, oh, well, it just had a spear. Or like getting inconsistencies with it or making it feel bigger than what it is. It can have a negative impact. I've actually had that happen in a game of Starfinder, where I created a monster, and they were essentially a shadow demon. And when they heard shadow demon, they immediately thought that it was much stronger than it actually was. So me as a DM, I was like, oh, I'm not going to throw a monster at them that they can't deal with. But my players were already upset just by the description. Like, that's way too high a level, but yet they didn't even know what it was skinned with. And I was sitting there, no, you guys can wipe the floor with these things.
Yeah.
So that's a big don't. Understand, sometimes there's kind of a standard of making early monsters smaller, um, and it kind of giving a sense of you can take this on, but uh, yeah, like si- simple little things can really give an impact with just description and what you're reskinning.
Now, if you're
But
careful about it, I think, and this was brought up in chat a little bit ago, where even natives to a land where rhinoceri had been wandering, people thought a rhinoceros was a demon because it was a great beast that was very difficult to kill or hunt and had horns and would chase you and seemed aggressive. So if your player characters go to a new land, and this is again coming back into the contrast or matching of the setting, the locals
correct.
may very well describe an otherwise mundane rhinoceros. I mean, rhinoceri are dangerous creatures, but they're being described as demons, creatures of the hells or the abyss or something, and so that can create some tension and hype. And so how you play it off when you then describe the demon as a large gray beast looking like an armored horse that has a horn or two on its nose, and suddenly your players are like, wait, so a rhino? And you say, well, that's what you call him. You're doing some
Yeah,
world building. Um,
exactly. And the thing is that's a much safer way to go about it. But yeah, leaving things, it goes back to what we're saying. When you're giving a good description, it really helps ease the players into the situation and gives them an understanding what they're capable of doing. But I would say that's another don't, is if you describe something vaguely, it can give people a chance to be wild with their imaginations and create a bigger fear than exists. Essentially, like with certain types of insects. Um, some people are very afraid of spiders, and just the fact that it's a spider, it's deadly as it is. Um, so I would say, yeah, that's like with reskinning. Be careful with it, but the thing is generally adding colors, adding different skins and stuff like that, and it plays exactly like the monster. You are really good to go. Um, and then as for homebrew, homebrew is a little bit more tricky, but as long as you understand the mechanics of the game system and you create something that is balanced for what it is, you can really do anything that you want. So, kind of like what we were getting at before, a lot of the monsters we were talking about are very homebrew, but as soon as you apply them to the system or transfer them and you make them balanced, no one will have a problem with those as well. But that is the big trick, is balancing monsters for your system when you're going homebrew, because the last thing you want to do is drop in your version of a goblin and they're your little precious, so you give them chainsaw teeth that just destroy everything, and your players say that is not fun. But usually when you are doing homebrew, borrowing from things that are already in the system so you can gauge yourself. Essentially, like saying, well, dragons are really cool, but I wish they would have this spell. I would like them to have a different breath weapon. Let's give them 2 heads and stuff like that, but you keep the hit points the same and just add a couple new spells and everything like that. That's actually a very strong step to take into homebrew. Because you know that it's still essentially the same monster, and the damage output is exactly the same. And that's really the best step when you start getting into homebrew, is mirroring yourself off of existing creatures or monsters. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be evil, because once again, it's your game. You can decide someone has a little bit more consciousness, but pretty much chromatic dragons are evil for the fact is their mama is Tiamat. And she is a ferocious god or goddess.
And if it's different in your world, then have chromatics be every chromatic's lawful good and benevolent.
Yeah, and the thing is there could be maybe, like, let's just say a white dragon has been locked in its mountaintops for far too long and meditated for a long time and has gained some sympathy for the humans that it has terrorized forever, and worked out a deal: if they feed the dragon in turn will protect the city.
Yeah, and it could be just that one. And I would like to point out too, having creatures that are described like that are excellent if you want to explore the concept of nature versus nurture. You know, if you find a white dragon egg, can you raise it to be a good dragon? Or is it inherently, tending towards evil? Towards evil, or as Bubonic One does rightfully say, to have these very selfish feelings above selfless feelings.
I like to think of dragons kind of like chimps. So everyone thinks they're awesome, cute, and everything like that, but when they get older, they rip off your face and your fingers. So, like, it will be fun and hunky-dory for a long time, but then you'll get messed up. But there's also a control monster later and stuff like that, so that I could definitely see someone in the world controlling or befriending a chromatic dragon. But actually, that also goes into what we were kind of talking about with monsters reskinning and everything like that. Reskinning is exactly that is you're taking a white dragon, and let's say you reskin the bronze dragon with the white dragon. You now have your chromatic dragon that works perfectly in the world, but it's now very noble and stands by people of the city, and it is very lawful. That is very powerful. Also, taking a red dragon and making it a gold dragon. You now have something that is very evil and could possibly be something that, like we were saying before, this kingdom has raised this gold dragon forever. Everything was fine, and then all of a sudden it just destroyed the entire east side and has gone mad. And that could also create, just with that reskinning alone, some conflict, because people have an understanding of what a gold dragon is to them, especially players that study the lore. And they would be like, we shouldn't go after metallic dragons, but yet here's this one obviously breaking the ethics and values of our system. And then the murder hobo will always just say, yeah, let's get it.
Another trophy for the wall.
But yeah, also with kind of going from, we went from NPCs the other day to monsters now. Monsters are, doesn't matter if it is your, like something simple like a snake, and I'll hearken unto something me and you talked about back in the day. But any monster can pretty much be a villain. Back to the chupacabra I was talking about before, it didn't have a mind or anything, but it was just preying on the goats, and it was considered a demon, and it was evil and gained a reputation about it. But we were also talking about a giant constrictor snake, and we were talking about why would it have a shield and stuff like that, and we gave it a whole story about how it was a druid that has lost its ability to change shape. So it was stuck as a giant constrictor snake. The thing is, that right there builds an entire story just with a monster, and I would say would be a very impactful thing, is that you could turn a monster into an NPC, or vice versa. It gets a thing that you think is an NPC ends up being the villain, or probably the biggest monster that your players are dealing with. I'll give an example. Is there was a fire elemental, and it was in this society for these players that I was doing, and essentially this fire elemental was screaming out to the adventurers to essentially put him out of his misery, and he was like screaming uncontrollably, couldn't control himself, and he's talking normally but frantic to them as he's completely destroying the village that he's in. And that right there, they were instantly confused on, like, why is this person that's normal in this society attacking their own village and stuff like that, but yet they're trying to talk to us to alleviate the situation. And it went into a much deeper story about how he destroyed his own family and watched them burn in his hands, and he couldn't control it because he was being manipulated by evil that he did not know. So he he asked for his death to put him out of his misery of the torment and the torture that he was just put through, and thank the adventurers when they did so. That right there, a monster wasn't the monster, it was the act that he was doing, created a very intense story, and really took my players out of the chop 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 XP pinata. And also built up to the other monster, because that is the intent of creating the monster, is in the villain. And that right there, they knew right then that they wanted to go after and go after the monster that did that to the fire elemental.
Yeah, it was personal. Like it's not just, oh well, we hear about things that are happening to other people. It happened to us.
Oh yeah,
that makes us upset.
Yeah, and they don't want that. Like, and they also have that sense of fear of what if what if that happens to one of us while we're going after that? That creates a really good narrative, and the monster is the act, not even the creature at that point. And that is a very strong thing to use narratively, and understanding that you can, in your story, it's the words, it's the venom that the villain is spitting is more vicious than necessarily the attack that they can give out. Um, and that will lead up to multiple things that you can layer with your monsters and give them more impact, but also back to that first thing, creating contrast in a setting that you think is a reality. Because believe it or not, when we're telling a story or we're playing a game of D&D, we're creating our own reality and it becomes somewhat tangible.
Oh yes, yes. It can. I've certainly seen sessions that have either brought tears to my eyes or the eyes of a player or several, where people have gotten stressed and almost to the point of fisticuffs with each other, and things that have manifested from technically something that doesn't exist, but it's moving us as physical creatures that are real. I mean, we exist. I guess depending on how philosophical you want to get, do we really? But yes, we're these physical, tangible creatures that are getting worked up physically and tangibly over something that technically doesn't exist.
Well, and bubonic, I would say, like, this is actual a personal fear that I would even put into a game and stuff like that. One of my fears is that I have a mind and I am human, and that there's murderers and all these things that we think are evil, but we're made from the same material. And who's to say that, like, a bump in the head could change that all for you? That's a huge fear. Like, what separates you from them is a very thin line, and it's just the connected stuff inside of the tissue of your skull. So,
DDM's apparently been missing out on emotional levels like that.
well, and diadems, the thing is that's why it's so important. And like, I would like to bring it to everyone, is understanding that kind of drive and understanding the monster that's created creates the impact, the drama, the narrative, and putting your own fears and recreating them in a way creates a really good story. Um, Hence that the fire elemental. Uh, and yeah, giving sensibility and a reason to work in the world is always really good. If you can get your players to feel bad a little bit for what they're doing, even though they feel right in the way, like they feel just, but for instance, one story that happened to me is, this was way back in my D&D infancy, and I don't know why my DM did this, but he had me run into a cobalt. I was just strolling out on a night, at night. A cobalt walks up, immediately runs away, and I was still new to D&D, so I threw my javelin at it, completely stuck it to a tree. And then I said, of course, the classic thing, go loot the body. And then he said, you find a grocery list and a note from his wife.
Yep.
And I was like, oh. And I was like, you mean I just took out this person? And I was like, okay, I make camp. And then he attacked me with a undead cobalt. Because killing something in vain like that can make some pretty nasty villains, especially for low level.
Yep. Diadems, I certainly hope that you do get some kind of an emotional, like an emotional reaction. I mean, hopefully nothing that's heated to the point of people, raising voices or, kind of giving these other bodily signs of threat. But Technatron, that's a very compelling story. And I think that's something that, a lot of times we might consider in a meta sense or even in character. Yeah, kobolds are just dumb little lizards. Yeah, they're lizard people. But whatever, you can kill them. You can kill goblins or, whatever, myconids. But you do bring it home on revelations like that. The grocery list. The note from his loving wife and, is like, oh, it's probably just... I know it's a lot on the grocery list this week, but you know that the clutch of eggs are due to hatch in a week, and we could really use a lot more. James says, I've had enough about people shouting lately. It's time to hack and slash in dungeon at the moment. So yeah, you just want to have that purge, just that I don't care about anything but kicking in the door, fighting monsters. The blood must flow, and I want my dice to roll loud and proud.
And that is a very important side of D&D. You cannot have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the jelly. But I'm just saying, when you create impact in your game with your monsters and stuff like that, you should be able to create a sense of, like, did I just do that, or a sense of reality to it. If you actually, this is something that I like to do, but sometimes I like to narrate the move, essentially what the player's doing, and give it a pretty good description. Whether it be gory or something a little bit gorier, or essentially something that they didn't expect. But describing a frostbolt igniting in their hand and making the room kind of chill as it lights up and casts through the bones of the cobalt as you hear it crystallize and shatter as it falls to the ground and eventually thaws out and blood starts to spread. They're like, oh, my spell has a lot more impact than I thought it did.
Yeah, it makes it visceral. It's more personal than I cast an ice spell. You're describing the effect it has on the world, the impact, and the way. If for any of you who've been here for the night after night sessions we're having, this kind of storytelling goes back to some techniques that Technatron was talking about the other day. I think it was even just last night about that creative setting. Well, it might have been in the first day, but then again, all the lessons as we're building are also kind of, it's a common line bleeding through all of them. He didn't just say the attack hits and the kobold dies. If you listen to his words, it was evocative. He's putting you into the scene. And the scene may very well cause your own feelings to rise up as a player and or as your player character, right? As the character. Because far too often, if you say my character attacks, I hit. Oh, and then the DM says, sure, your character deals 7 ice damage. Or cold damage. Yeah, that removes you from the scene. It can strip away so much opportunity to explore and to think and especially to feel.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is kind of like that. You kind of want to slug through this mass of zombies. You don't want to describe everything, but describing what has happened after you've gone through them is just as powerful as doing it every move. So using that as a DM is a really good tool of pick and choosing your battles, of being descriptive by drawing your players back into the game, but also developing the world. It is a kind of tricky, but once you get the hang of that, it really gives some uh real good flavor to combat or to your world.
And it makes reskinning or homebrewing monsters so much easier
Oh,
than just
definitely.
going with I need a CR5 with a claw attack. Oh well, you could find those, and I suppose that could lead to an easy reskinning. But by asking yourself for the description, by making it a part of the world, I did make the note here, Technatron, that when making monsters, it's great practice for the three whys. Why is this creature here? And then you answer that. Oh, so then why, why about the result? Oh, so why did it decide then to come here based on that result that then led to the attack or the manifestation or whatever? All of these are good techniques that'll just continue to crop up again and again.
Oh yeah. And the thing is anytime you ask yourself a question, it will always open itself up to you, especially when you give yourself more options for it. Kind of like with the NPC yesterday, the Dragonborn, where like, why does he have this very interesting piercing? And also, why is it that they fear leaves? And we gave several reasons why, and that made that character come to life. And uh uh let's just say that Dragonborn is the monster in this situation. The fact that he could have a small story about how he had lost his breath weapon and stuff like that would actually give us a little bit of a narrative of how he wants to seek vengeance on whoever took it from him, or anything like that, or even the fear of leaves. We could do something like that. Maybe it was a druid that had taken his breath weapon. Therefore, if there's a druid in the group, maybe seeks them out with vigor and vim.
As that initial vent, and it could then go on to learn, well, maybe not all humans or humanoids or whatever, or even just druids by their job, not just their appearance. Maybe they're not all bad. And it's very interesting then, in that case, when you have a monster or an NPC, look at the player characters as the things to be studied, and that they learn and grow about the PCs. Because that kind of turnabout, it causes us all to reflect. Wow, I never thought of us in that light before, but I can totally see it. How they might think we're the monsters.
Oh
Or
yeah.
all our druids are all evil breath stealers or something like that.
I mean, we can keep it simple, but I know this is kind of heated. But people like vegans and meat eaters.
Yeah.
Something as simple as that is people will say, "Oh, one side's weak. You're not getting this. Oh, you're just a leaf eater." And then on the other side, you're destroying creatures. You monster. You this and blah blah blah. Just right there in the contrast
Yep.
of just a societal standard, they're creating a environment that draws a line and also villainizes each other in a way. And that's a good way of building cities and civilizations. Kind of like why elves don't like interacting with humans as much, because they are a stinky breed.
Yes. They spend their short time on this world just sort of mucking about, probably even wasting a lot of time that the elves might consider, um, and that's why role playing is such a wonderful hobby, because we can explore these aspects of ourself as an individual, or about our culture, in which we were raised or where we live or a particular belief system, be it, religious, philosophical, political, or the like, we can challenge ourselves to think differently about things that we may otherwise, hold closely. And that ends up improving us as a player. Now, whether or not, you could still have a curmudgeon that will never accept change as a character, and that's fine. It's a part of the story. But you've still challenged yourself to perhaps think about this world in a different mindset, which could go on to have you start thinking about things happening in your own world differently, and hopefully more positively, as you round out your thoughts and as you perhaps come to terms with things, or you feel comfortable now expressing an idea or something because you've had the practice to do it in a role-playing setting. Or you've even said, you know what, I'm humble enough, I get it, that I'm actually the monster. And when you come to terms with that, making peace with yourself is the first step in making peace with others or the world itself.
Yeah, you're describing the life of a DM.
Yes, and I hope all of you out there have that opportunity to step up in this life of a DM, of discovery, of being a part of just something bigger and wonderful. Technatron,
sure.
are you okay if we get up and take a bit of a stretch break?
I was just going to suggest that.
Awesome.
So.
Then everyone, I suggest, you don't have to, I'm not going to enforce it, but why don't we get up? If you got to use the restroom, get a drink or a snack or something, go ahead and do so. And when we come back, what's the next thing that we're going to be talking about regarding monsters?
Let's go with the topic of CR was coming up quite a bit.
Yes.
Let's go in about how to adjust the CR, make it work. We'll primarily work with 5e, but I'll make it so it's applicable to other systems as well.
Excellent. All right, then. So we'll talk about challenge rating as a concept in 5e, but how you can extrapolate that to different systems. So we'll be back in just a little bit, everyone.